together again. So I just want to welcome everyone and thank you for coming out on a beautiful Saturday to join with us today. And I want to introduce the co-chairs of our board of directors, Rosemary Keene and Jonathan King. And I'll turn it over to you to welcome everyone.
Hi, everybody. It's the King and the Keen today. I'll start off, since this is our annual meeting. It's a chance to look back over our year and then make our plans to move ahead full steam. This past year has been one of amazing growth for Mass Peace Action. It's been wonderful to be a part of it. Big thanks to Cole and Brian and now Amar, our third full-time staffer and another organizer. And we'll soon be hearing more about all this work from our working groups. A second issue this year has been the big increase in racial justice energy and action. Unfortunately prompted by the death of George Floyd at the hands of the police. As you all know, the trial ended this past Tuesday with a guilty verdict, which was a relief, but was far from justice, as the movement for Black Lives and many groups have been talking about. And the third thing this past year, of course, has been the pandemic. We've lost a lot of people, way too many people, both to the pandemic and for other causes. I'm going to name three that are of particular significance, and you all can name in your minds who you're thinking about. Dr. Bernard Lown, Ramsey Clark, and Reese Erlich are three big losses to our movement. And so I'm just going to read a very short comment that was written on the occasion of a Martin Luther King Day observance. We gather to remember a fallen friend. We continue our search for understanding, seeking pathways to the future. Justice makes tireless demands. As we gather in common cause, let us find a way and the courage to realize justice and peace, this vision that lives within all of us. So thank you all for being here today, and I'm sending the mic over to Jonathan.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary, for those words and visions. Well, you know, for all of us, if you think about the national scene, it certainly has been tumultuous, but positive, navigating past the direct threat to electoral democracy in the presidential campaign, the election of Black and Jewish senators from Georgia, shifting the balance of power in the Senate ever so slightly, but very significantly, the successful vaccine rollouts, and the progressive domestic policies that have been initiated by the Biden administration on many fronts. On the other hand, the administration has proposed further increases in the already bloated Pentagon budget. Contracts have been awarded for the new generation of nuclear weapons. Sanctions causing misery for millions of civilians and nations around the world, Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, have not been lifted. So the peace movement is not yet the major force in American politics that it once was, when some of us were younger and there wasn't a campus in the country that didn't have an anti-war group in the community. Things have changed. But it is important, as Rosemary indicated initially, that we recognize the particular role and value of peace action. You know, our members, most of you out there are Massachusetts residents, but our scope and our impact are national, and in fact, increasingly international. Thus, our upcoming prohibiting first use of nuclear weapons conference in a couple of weeks, with the lead partners with important national organizations, Council for a Livable World, Code Pink, Lawyers for Nuclear Policy, the Campaign for Disarmament and Common Security, and others. Our vaccine seminars have included spokespeople, doctors and experts from Cuba to India, around the world. And in fact, we're one of the few major nuclear disarmament organizations that are truly an anti-war organization. And we mobilize to protect Palestinians, the people of Venezuela and Iran, other Middle Eastern nations. We've been working to strengthen our ties with National Our Revolution and the National Poor People's Campaign, both of whom have opposition to the war economy in their platform. So we share a common platform. So though all these efforts stretch our staff pretty thin, and also the hundreds of volunteers that do all the work, it is through the extraordinary basis of those of you who are here at this meeting that provide this leadership on many of these fronts, as you'll hear in the coming talks. And with your continued support, we will continue to play this essential role in the political life of the nation. Thanks. So.
Thank you, Jonathan and Rosemary, for your continued leadership and for those words. Next, I want to turn the mic over to Professor Prasannan Parthasarathy to speak a little bit about the work of our Middle East working group. Prasannan, take it away.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Rosemary and Jonathan. I think it's fitting that our work around the Middle East is kicking off the reports from the various projects and working groups that Mass Peace Action has going right now. And I say it's fitting that the Middle East kicks it off because since the end of the Cold War, the Middle East has really been the main focus of US militarism and US military action, base building, really since the first Gulf War. So our work on bringing a more peaceful foreign policy to the region is multifaceted and pretty far-reaching. But it really, the work of the Middle East Working Group focuses on three areas. The first is to end these endless wars in the region, and this ranges from Afghanistan all the way to Syria. And the election of Biden has brought us some good news on the Afghanistan front, and we applaud his resolve to withdraw US troops by September 11th of this year. And we call that in that withdrawal of troops should be included all contractors and other types of military personnel. So it should be really a far-reaching US military disengagement from Afghanistan. But that is not enough. We call upon the US also to finance a rebuilding of the country, which has been devastated first by 20 years of direct US warfare, but before that by more than 20 years of indirect US support for various kinds of interventions there. Our work in Syria is still ongoing, but ending these endless wars and repealing the AUMFs and so on, I mean, that's also a part of this campaign, is a key portion of our work. A second important area of work is returning to the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. And again, the election of Biden has brought some more favorable news. Nevertheless, there are powerful forces that do not want to see any kind of reconciliation between the US and Iran. So our work there continues and is quite urgent given various deadlines that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And finally, a third area of our work is the war on Yemen, trying to bring that horrible conflict to an end. And linked to that are two other important issues. One is breaking the US-Saudi alliance, really trying to put an end to all arms sales and various other kinds of support extended to the Saudi regime. And linked to these Yemen and Saudi campaigns is a local campaign to put pressure on the Raytheon Corporation to stop being a major supplier of arms to the Saudi Arabian government. So that's really the work of the Middle East Working Group. Paul Shannon is the chair of the group. Please contact him or me or other members of the group if you're interested in contributing to our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Prasannan. And just to let everyone know, we will be sending out a follow-up email with ways to contact the leadership of each of our working groups and the time of our next meeting and ways for you to become even more directly involved than you already are. So watch your inboxes for a follow-up email. Next, I want to turn the mic over to Susan Mirsky, who will talk a little bit about our nuclear disarmament working group. Go ahead, Susan.
Hi all. So the Nuclear Disarmament Working Group is a long-standing group. It has 150 members, 20 to 25 of which attend bi-weekly meetings. And these are held on Sunday afternoons, 4 to 5:30 p.m. We welcome new members, new ideas and issues that pertain to nuclear weapons. We work on many levels, the moral, technical, political, legislative, and legal perspective to that end goal of nuclear disarmament and the elimination of nuclear weapons. We implement plans for cooperative actions, programs, webinars, and conferences, and also include representatives of more than half a dozen of other national nuclear disarmament advocacy groups that Jonathan mentioned. And so we can propagate really good ideas reasonably efficiently. We also have subgroups on no first use, public engagement and movement building, which you'll hear from directly, and the TPNW, Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, that meet separately in addition. As an integral part of work to abolish nuclear weapons, the TPN subgroup has as its mission to build support in the US for this country to sign, ratify, and implement the treaty with actions in Massachusetts and also in coordination with actions elsewhere in the country and around the world. The Nuclear Disarmament Working Group have had campaigns connecting the military budget with human needs. We have looked at subways, not submarines, mines, not missiles, and we fully applaud Senator Markey's new bill. Our present campaign is no first use. We've organized a conference to discuss and implement prohibiting the first use of nuclear weapons, May 15th. Understanding the stakes, the horrific realities of nuclear exchange, declaring and legislating a no first use policy will be a major obtainable step. There are major co-sponsors and speakers, some of whom include Senator Markey, Representative Ted Lieu, William Perry, and so many others. Also 2 outstanding poets. There'll be panels on the dangers, constitutional control issues, and nuclear weapons policy. There are breakout sessions on why no first use will keep us safe, communication and messaging, street theater, social media, artivism. Not really a word, but you'll come and you'll see what it's all about. Congressional strategy, recruiting, organization building, back from the brink, and stopping the money pit missile and reducing the nuclear weapons budget. So put it on your calendar, May 15th, and attend, and please come to our working group meetings. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Susan. Really appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to that event on the 15th. Moving right along, I want to turn the floor back over to Jonathan King so he can discuss in a little more depth a really important initiative that he himself started to respond to the coronavirus pandemic, that being, of course, our Fund Healthcare, Not Warfare campaign. Jonathan?
Thanks, Ryan. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
So, when the pandemic broke out, it was transparently and really cruelly obvious that the US was not prepared. Wasn't immediately obvious to a lot of people why in the richest, one of the richest, most scientifically advanced countries in the world, why we were so unprepared for the coronavirus. However, in MAPA, many of us understood that part of the answer was decades of congressional budgets which starved human needs, particularly in areas like public health, biomedical research, healthcare, in order to fund the bloated military budget. So with the onset of the pandemic, the deaths of tens of thousands of people, the economy in shambles, this was clearly the single biggest issue on the minds of most Americans. As Susan mentioned, our original campaign to cut the nuclear weapons budget, developed in the Nuclear Disarmament Working Group, we focused actually on two areas: public transit with subways, not submarines, and then on education with books, not bombs, and invest in mines, not missiles. But when the pandemic broke out, we decided let's turn to where people really are. Let's go meet them, what's on their minds, and unite with them about the need for more funding. But then put forward the position that if they want more funding, they're going to have to, oppose this waste of taxpayers' money on the weapons buildup. So we identified leaders and at the front line of the pandemic: nurses, personal care providers, ER doctors, public health epidemiologists, community health center leaders, and we invited them to educate you and us, our MAPA membership, in a series of webinars. It's been now more than half a dozen. So in the course of these webinars, we learned about the problems in public health, healthcare, hospitals, personal care, but they all learned a little bit about the Pentagon budget and nuclear weapons budget, because we always had that in the mix. And as a result, we slowly developed a relationship with the Mass Nurses Association, MassCare, which is the Medicare for All group, the Mass Public Health Association, Service Employees 1199, Physicians for National Health Program, ESA, Progressive Democrats of America, and other groups that have real constituencies. And we were able to recruit some of these leaders into our actual working group. Sandy Eaton from MassCare, Dr. Alan Mayans of Physicians for National Health Program, Louise Parker from DSA, Catherine Delory from the Women's Health Institute, and Amar. We had very capable staffing in Amar Ahmad. So this is actually, now, one of the things we learned in the course of this is that within that world, each of these groups were extraordinarily siloed. Physicians in hospitals had very little connection with the nurses in the community healthcare center or personal care providers that were visiting people in the homes and nursing care. And they didn't have a coherent program that we could just latch onto. We just thought, well, we'll be the caboose on that train. So our current project, we're going to have in June an actual, much more substantial forum, like we have on like No First Use, where we bring together representatives of these different groups to talk about funding the public health needs by cutting the military budget. And it's a step forward. And it's kind of a model, because every state in the union has a public health association. Every state in the union has a nurses association. And this mode of starting with, what does the state legislature have to vote to upgrade public health in the state? But also, the need in the U.S. Congress to shift some funds too. We think it's an important initiative, and we're excited to kind of move forward. We're not being attacked by Russia. We're not being attacked by China. We're not being attacked by North Korea. We're being attacked by the coronavirus, and the biggest, meanest, most dangerous missile and most expensive missiles in the world are useless against the coronavirus. And the more people understand this, the more likely we'll be able to win some of these battles. So thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. Next, I want to turn it over to our board member, Jeff Klein, who's also very involved in Dorchester People for Peace. And he is going to talk about the work of our Palestine-Israel working group. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone. The Palestine-Israel Working Group is one of the newer areas of activity of MAPPA. Although the members of our working group are primarily motivated by a sense of solidarity with Palestinians, our focus, as the focus of MAPPA in general, is on U.S. policy and changing U.S. policy toward Palestine and Israel. We have, over the years, developed a network that we call A New Day that has 400 or so activists in every congressional district of the state. And we're trying to sort of focus and mobilize that energy toward changing and activating the positions of our congressional delegation to be better on Israel and Palestine. We also were instrumental in creating a statewide network called Massachusetts Against Israeli Annexation that includes 20 or so organizations, most of whom are not primarily focused on the Israel-Palestine issue, but are broad-based peace and anti-war organizations. And we also joined a coalition against the sale of Ruger firearms to Israel. The Sturm Ruger company is based in New England, and they manufacture various weapons that have been used in mass killings in the United States, but also sell sniper rifles to Israel that they use, because they're small caliber weapons, they use, as they call it, crowd control, and have killed dozens of Palestinians who are unarmed and non-threatening to Israeli security forces. Where things stand now, we have a bill in the Massachusetts state legislature that would ban lobbyist paid travel. This affects a lot of, this is basically a good government bill, but our focus has been because the chief user of this loophole that allows lobbyists to pay for travel has been the pro-Israel organizations, and particularly the JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council, that has sent scores of public officials and legislators on propaganda trips to Israel. So that's a bill that's active in this legislature. Nationally, in some ways, we're winning the battle within the Democratic Party, at least at the base. It's now a matter of common opinion that Democrats, a majority of Democrats, are opposed to unconditional aid to Israel and unconditional support for their occupation. But we're a long way from achieving a breakthrough in terms of influence among public officials on those issues. And there's a way of a little bit of a pulse in Congress now. There are 20 or 30, this is something new, there are 20 or 30 House representatives who are pretty consistently advocating more attention to Palestinian rights and more criticism of Israel. But the Israel lobby is still very powerful. And just recently, they organized a congressional letter signed by 3/4 of the members of Congress, both parties, 330 representatives, declaring that any discussion of conditioning or limiting military aid to Israel, which is almost $4 billion a year, is out of limits. And it was signed by 4 out of the 9 members of our state congressional delegation, which is much better than average. The 4 that signed it are Keating, Neal, Auchincloss, and Moulton, who are the sort of hardcore of the sort of pro-Israel members of our delegation. But it's notable that 5 members did not sign it, which is a much higher proportion of non-signers than in the Congress as a whole. And they include Presley, who has been a champion of Palestinian rights in Congress, Clark, McGovern, Trahan, and Lynch. So, we've made some progress in our state. And just in closing, I want to remind everybody in MAPPA who is not primarily focused on this issue that the Israel lobby in Washington and elsewhere is very powerfully part of the pro-war lobby. That the interests of Israel in the Middle East and political influence in the United States is focused on increasing tension and confrontation with Iran. They oppose the US withdrawal from Afghanistan and generally support any sort of warlike involvement of the US in the Middle East and elsewhere. So if we're going to defeat the war lobby, we also have to defeat the Israel lobby in Washington. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate those words. Next, I'm going to turn it over to our board member, Rosalie Anders, who is going to speak on the work of our Peace and Climate Working Group. Take it away, Rosalie.
You're muted, Rosalie.
All right. Well, along with working on the elections and on getting the state climate legislation passed, which was wonderful, the Peace and Climate Working Group has primarily focused on educational events over the past year, which of course have shifted from in-person to virtual. And a key goal we've had has been to raise awareness among climate activists, especially younger activists, of the connections between military operations and a militarized foreign policy and climate disruption, both because of the staggering amount of environmental destruction caused by the US military and because of the need to create more cooperation and less competition and threatening behavior among nations. So we need international competition, cooperation, not military posturing, if we're going to tackle climate change successfully. We featured a talk by Noam Chomsky that highlighted the connections, and Nick Rabb created a well-attended 4-part teach-in, the last of which is happening right this afternoon, mainly targeting climate activists around the connections between the military and climate destruction. We're planning a series of what will be action-oriented webinars around intersecting issues, and we'll be reaching out to climate groups that we're engaged with to partner and carry out the webinars. Right now, we're weighing a bunch of ideas, and we'll pick a couple at our main meeting. Most of our core group members are also involved with climate groups, and we will be working to leverage those connections. We've also created a mission statement and principles to share with these and other groups. And we are, in addition, developing a discussion forum around how to further the profound changes we see are needed, including different ways of defining national security and prosperity. How does our economic system need to change? We need a shift in national values, as I know you all know, away from a hierarchical, zero-sum, racist, excessively militaristic culture to one that is inclusive and life-sustaining. So how can this happen in the time frame needed? And what can we do to help make it happen? So that's going to be the focus of this discussion group. That's it.
Thank you very much, Rosalie. I appreciate it. And next, we're going to be turning it over to our board member and co-chair of our Latin America and Caribbean Working Group, Yoav Vilanevsky. Let me put you up on the screen, Yoav, and you can take it away. Just one moment.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Nice to see all of you. Welcome to our annual meeting. I'll say a few words about our committee. We have a very good group, very active. Our focus is education, building awareness around the issue, for example, of sanctions in Venezuela. Sanctions that are killing tens of thousands of people in the name of protecting human rights. That has been a focus of our work. We are doing work on Cuba. We are in the middle of a very interesting series where we interview people in Cuba, and conversations about the economy, about the medical system in Cuba and other issues. On the issue of Venezuela, the last event on March 24th, which was the anniversary of the assassination of Archbishop Romero in El Salvador, we did a very successful event next to the office of McGovern, who actually showed up to and met with us outside his office. And surprisingly, he came strongly against blanket sanctions. He announced that he does not recognize Guaido as a president of Venezuela, and he supports the idea that Venezuela should own its own natural resources. So that was a good activity, good action. We did an action around Haiti. As you know, there is a very serious crisis in Haiti. There is a dictatorship of Jovenel Moise, supported by the US, the European Union, and the UN. The killing, the kidnapping, the situation is really very, very difficult in Haiti. We organized an event on March 29th. We did the event on Honduras after in the summer, Garifuna leaders were kidnapped and have not heard since then. We did a few webinars on Bolivia, Nicaragua, and so on. In our work, we create contacts and working together with other groups. For example, with the Latin America Solidarity Coalition of Western Massachusetts, with the Hartford Cuba Solidarity, with CONCODA, which is the National Network for Support of Haiti against the dictatorship of Moise, the Honduras Solidarity Network, the Alliance for Global Justice, Black Alliance for Peace, Code Pink, Gray Zone, and the Indigenous Anti-Patriarchal Feminist Collective in Bolivia. These are some of the organizations that we are working with. So I would like to, the work is huge. There's so much to do, so many issues to deal with, so many problems, from the blockade of Cuba to sanctions that kill, to supporting dictators, to coup attempts, and so on. So you're welcome to join us, and I'm looking forward to see you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Yoav. Much appreciated. Next, we're going to turn the mic back over to our board co-chair, Rosemary Keene, who is going to talk a little bit about the work of our Racial Justice and Decolonization Working Group. Go ahead, Rosemary.
Thank you, Brian. The big development this year with the Racial Justice Decolonization Working Group has been that we divided into subgroups. So we have one for the Indigenous Solidarity effort, and the second is focused on racial justice. The Indigenous subgroup has been working to put Indigenous issues on the front lines of anti-war work. In 2020, the Indigenous group and our whole group worked with the Indigenous leadership on the Massachusetts Indigenous Legislative Agenda. And we played our role in getting a bill passed to change, finally, the Commonwealth flag and seal, that very racist flag and seal. We've held webinars and a book read for the book As Long as Grass Grows by Dina Gillow-Whitaker. This year, we're working for the Indigenous agenda to pass 5 bills, including the bill to ban Native mascots in public schools and to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. We support the resistance trying to save the pine forests in Plymouth and stopping Line 3 pipeline in Minnesota. We support the Land Back campaign and show our support to those that lived on this land for time immemorial. The Racial Justice Group has identified criminal injustice and defund/reform the police as priorities. These include state and federal legislation, attention to the City of Boston Police Department budget, turning out actions initiated by key organizations and developing a series of webinars on each of these topics. Some of the criminal injustice items include opposing building a new women's prison. And this is legislation to ban, to have a freeze on any prison construction. Supporting clemency campaigns and vaccine equity for the incarcerated. The defund/reform police is multi-level and requires close monitoring. As you all know, it's a situation where we're hearing news and things are changing every day. We continue to work with the Poor People's Campaign, with Sabina and Vaughn, and also Kevin Peterson at the New Democracy Coalition, and engage in solidarity actions as we're able to do that. Each of our subgroups has identified the need to do e-alerts and to write articles more, and that's a work in progress. We have an ongoing desire to work on internal racial justice decolonization education issues within MAPA. And that's something we haven't figured out what the next step is. But one of them might be for all of us to view this new film coming out by Raoul Peck, who did I Am Not Your Negro, about James Baldwin. And this one is called Exterminate All the Brutes, and it's a focus on the history of white supremacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. I'm just going to make a brief presentation on some of the new working groups that have just been started up recently by Massachusetts Peace Action, and also describe a couple of the coalitions that we take part in. But before I do, I just want to let people know that once I've finished, we are going to open it up for your comments and questions for some of us. And you can either ask a question through the chat, or an even better way to do it is to go to the bottom of your screen and hit the participants button and then click raise hand. And we will recognize you in turn and try and answer as many of your questions and hear your comments as possible. We want to get to everyone, so please keep your comments and questions brief. So allow me to talk a little bit about our new authoritarianism working group that started in the last year as a response to the growing threat of right-wing fascism that really did raise up as part of the movement in support of Donald Trump, of course, culminating in the attempted insurrection that took place on January the 6th. This is a real threat to our democratic way of life here in the United States, and it needs to be defended against. So we have started up an authoritarianism working group. It's been very well attended, where people can come together and discuss the problem, and it also has a focus on studying the issues of, especially the history of the rise of right-wing nationalism and fascism in the past, and the best ways to resist it. We had an incredibly successful program that actually hosted Noam Chomsky. We also hosted Colonel Larry Wilkerson to talk about his efforts to defend against the attempt to steal the election by Donald Trump and his supporters. It was a real achievement to be able to stave off that attempt and get Donald Trump out of the White House. But that threat of right-wing nationalism continues. And we take that very seriously here at Massachusetts Peace Action. So we hope you'll all consider getting more involved in the fight against rising authoritarianism. Another important working group that we have recently started is the No New Cold War working group. We talked a little bit about this already, but the rising tensions between the United States and China we see as a real threat to peace in the future, and also a driver for increased military spending. We all know that the proposed plan of much of the foreign policy blob is to pivot from wars and involvement in the Middle East and have a military buildup in the Indo-Pacific region against China. We see that as perhaps the most dangerous threat to peace in the coming generation. And we have started this group to make sure that we are not led into another Cold War, which is not only going to be incredibly expensive, but incredibly dangerous, not just to the citizens of the United States and China, but to every human being on the planet Earth. So we encourage you all to get involved in that, and for all peace activists to think about the threat of a new Cold War with China. That group is also focusing in part on great power rivalries and the current tensions between the United States and Russia. We believe that in order to solve global problems like climate change and pandemics and even international terrorism, there is a necessity to cooperate between the United States, China, and Russia. We simply cannot let tensions arise. Another coalition effort that we are working on is Lift the Sanctions campaign. Economic sanctions are a form of warfare, not an alternative to warfare. It is really a form of modern siege. And despite the fact that humanitarian loopholes are supposed to exist in these economic sanctions, we know for a fact that these policies affect normal working poor citizens' ability to get food and medicine and the needs of basic day-to-day life. We know from the history of sanctions that they do not prevent war, but they actually make war more likely. So we've done a series of webinars on sanctions, focusing on Cuba, Iran, Venezuela, as well as North Korea. And we have partnered with Historians for Peace and Democracy in the recent launch of their new syllabus, An Empire of Sanctions. We had a very successful event just this week, a launch of that syllabus. And we're going to do more work with Historians for Peace and Democracy about how to remove these sanctions and get on a path towards diplomacy and not for collective punishment. We're also involved in the Korea Peace Now coalition that aims for peace on the Korean Peninsula and an official end to the Korean War, which, as I'm sure you all know, is still ongoing. There was an armistice signed in the 1950s, but never a proper peace treaty between the US and North Korea. So we encourage diplomacy between the US and North Korea. We oppose these very provocative and expensive war games that take place off the coast of North Korea. And once again, we encourage a lifting of the sanctions that are making life harder on the people of North Korea and only increasing their enmity towards the United States. One thing that was already mentioned by Prasannan was the Raytheon anti-war campaign, which is another coalition that Mass Peace Action is a member of. along with so many groups, United Against War and Militarism, the Veterans for Peace, Code Pink is involved, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, the Friends Meeting at Cambridge, the great Quaker group is also involved, and they actually do monthly vigils outside of the Raytheon facility at Cambridge. So one of the main goals has been to raise awareness about the US-Saudi UAE war in Yemen. We were very heartened to hear that President Biden said that he was going to stop all US support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen. But we are concerned because, as we know, the airstrikes have continued through the first 3 months of his presidency. And just recently this week, his special envoy, Tim Lenderking, was unable to answer basic questions from members of Congress about whether the United States had stopped supporting offensive operations by Saudi Arabia and their coalition allies in Yemen. The work of the Raytheon campaign also includes opposing their involvement in the modernization of our nuclear arsenal, as well as the drive to war with Iran. So Raytheon, one of the most powerful weapons manufacturers in the world, is located right here in Waltham, Massachusetts, with facilities all over Eastern Mass. So it is a way to localize some of these foreign policy issues, and also a way for people to fight the military-industrial complex right here in our own backyard. So those are some of the things that we are involved in. Thanks for sitting through our presentation of all the different work that we are involved in. As you can see, it's incredibly comprehensive and very involved. So we need all of the help that we can get from activists and volunteers who care about these issues. You know, there's something for everyone here at Massachusetts Peace Action. Peace is a progressive issue that really, really runs the gamut, and we need people to get involved at every level. I see Boreana is talking about the weekly vigil that they do up in Andover. There's so many different ways to get involved, and we hope that you will. We need you to. We're a grassroots organization. We live our grassroots values, and we need folks to get involved at every level. So at that, I'm going to open it up for questions and comments. So if you want to either put your question in the chat, or you can hit the participants button and then click raise hand, and we can take a few questions from folks. I see Michael Kowalczyk already has a question. Michael, I'll put you on the screen, and why don't you go ahead, Michael?
Great. Thanks, everyone, for this wonderful meeting virtually. It's pretty lively, so it's almost like we're in person. I'm getting closer. So my question is specifically for Representative McGovern. I just wanted to say, hello, Representative McGovern. We met virtually in February to discuss the US government's role in furthering the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. And I also had the pleasure of seeing you speak outside your Northampton office at a Venezuela Solidarity rally that I helped organize a month ago. Apologies, this is a bit long-winded, but my fellow activists and I are really encouraged by your positions on Cuba and Venezuela, but we need more than words now. You support lifting blanket sanctions against Venezuela, and on the question of so-called interim president Juan Guaido, you said, "I have never ever acknowledged Mr. Guaido as somehow the leader of Venezuela. I am disappointed that many of my colleagues on the Democratic side have acknowledged him as somehow the legitimate leader of Venezuela. He is not elected as the legitimate leader of Venezuela." Additionally, you said, "Our policy towards Venezuela or any other country ought not to be motivated by greed." So my question is, first, how are you going to translate your relatively progressive stances on Cuba and Venezuela into action? Second, will you co-sponsor Representative Omar's sanction bill once it is reintroduced, even if it doesn't immediately succeed? Third, if Representative Omar does not reintroduce her bill, will you introduce your own legislation to move away from blanket sanctions as a key element of US foreign policy? Fourth, will you commit to publicly pressuring President Biden and your Democratic Party colleagues who are hawkish and interventionist when it comes to these countries? And finally, will you write another public letter like the one that you sent on January 14th regarding Cuba and seek co-signers to the Biden administration, urging the president to restore US-Cuba relations, cease recognition of Juan Guaido, and immediately end blanket sanctions on Venezuela? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. We'll be sure to forward that question on to Representative McGovern after he has had a chance to speak. I'm sure we'll all be interested in hearing the answer to that. Thank you, Michael. I see that Sunny Robinson has her hand up. Sunny, go ahead with your question.
I actually wanted to make a comment and add to Yoav's report that a piece of what the Latin American and Caribbean Working Group has been working on are the issues of immigration, particularly as they affect Central Americans and Haiti and Haitians. And that on May 22nd, we have an upcoming webinar with Avi Chomsky, who has a brand new book out on Central America literally this week, and also being joined by staff from the School of the Americas Watch and John Lindsay Poland from Stop Arms to Mexico, and picking very much up on the kind of themes that MAPA does. Will be looking at what we do about genuine assistance to the peoples of Central America and not a continuation of so-called security and anti-drug related interventions. So May 22nd and Saturday afternoon at 2. Thanks very much.
And thank you for that information, Sunny. We'll be sure to share the links in the follow-up email so everyone can get involved. I see Val Mogadam has her hand up. Val, let's go to you next. You're just on mute, so. The wonders of Zoom, right? As I said before, hopefully this is the last time we will be holding our annual meeting virtually, and we'll all be in person next time. But go ahead, Val.
Quite so, and on such a beautiful day too. Perhaps we can hold it in the park.
Good idea.
And I have, first of all, hello to everyone, and I really appreciated all the working group reports. They were very informative and succinct. I have two issues that I want to raise. One has to do with two of our working groups, and this is a comment that I've made before about the Israel-Palestine working group and the Middle East working group. You know, there is some overlap between the two working groups, and in particular with respect to the question of Israel, because Jeff, of course, gave a very eloquent summary of the work that they're doing, and also some of the focus on Israel's hawkishness, really, and its support for war. And we're concerned about that in the Middle East working group too. We're concerned, for example, about Israel's attacks on Syria, on Iran, and Iraq. So when can we have that conversation about merging these two working groups? That's one. The other issue that I want to raise has to do with something that hasn't been raised yet. You know, the Biden record so far is, to put it mildly, a very mixed one, and not as good as it should have been. The administration has just approved the sale of these, very fancy stealth fighter jets to the UAE. The Biden administration was supposed to desist in sending quote unquote offensive weapons to these countries that are engaged in, bombing and attacking other countries. And yet it has just, sold $23 billion worth of these fighter jets to the UAE, which is a very aggressive country. Now we know what this is about. It's just, money. But it's really outrageous. And I wonder if this question can also be put to Mr. McGovern to see how he feels about this and what kind of opposition there is within the administration, within Congress and such against this. So thank you.
Thanks, Val. And we'll be sure to ask Representative McGovern that after he gives his talk, which is coming right up. Knowing his politics, I'm sure he is not thrilled to hear about that sale of military equipment to the UAE either. I think he was one of the only representatives in Congress to directly introduce a piece of legislation that would have prevented arms sales to Saudi Arabia, UAE's coalition ally, in their war against Yemen. So I will let him answer that when the time comes. And I'll be very interested to hear that answer as well. As for the work of the Palestine-Israel Working Group and the Middle East Working Group, obviously we're talking about countries that are in the same region. So the work does dovetail and overlap. I think you're absolutely right. I think that there is, and Jeff can jump in if he'd like to respond as well. But I think there is a dedicated movement for Palestinian rights in this country that is distinct as well. But we should talk about more collaboration between those groups, and not only those two groups, about co-sponsoring events and demonstrations, because obviously these issues overlap. And even with the Nuclear Disarmament Working Group, there has been a push to make the Middle East a nuclear weapons-free zone. And of course, as we all know, the only country to possess nuclear weapons in that exact region, of course, Pakistan has nuclear weapons, is Israel, although that is not officially acknowledged by the United States. So as I said earlier, peace really runs the gamut, and there's lots of different ways to get involved, but they're all interconnected. And perhaps that is one way we can respond to, I think, what is a good suggestion, which is our working groups coming together and working together on joint projects. I actually think that's a great suggestion.